Welcome inside another edition of Mountaineer Report here on the WVSN YouTube channel and available everywhere you get your podcasts. That means Apple, Spotify, Google Play, etc. I'm Mike Asti, that's Cody Nespor, and that's me taking a deep breath from the craziness that has been West Virginia's activity in the transfer portal as it now appears to be calming down. I believe January 14th marked the very first day of now the new year in 2025 that the West Virginia program did not announce a new coach or somebody to the staff. They did not receive a new commitment from the portal or did not lose a player. One of the three things did not happen on January 14th as we now continue the week without any of that news as well, again, as things are calming down. And honestly, in terms of just the portal movement by itself and all of that news really overall, it's probably been longer. It's probably been over a month really since Neil Brown was fired and then Rich Rodriguez was hired. So on this show, we are going to talk about the update to the movement since our last show. They actually have gained several Power 4 transfer commits. They now have a little bit of a crowded quarterback room, and all of us were talking about a battle between newcomer Jalen Henderson and Nico Markiel, the incumbent. There's now a third man a part of the mix, so we'll get into what we think of that decision for him to commit, why he's there, and if he's really a part of this battle, if it's really a three-team race, or maybe he's there for another reason, and kind of projecting what we think is going to happen in the spring, because the portal craziness is slowing down a little bit. It's not done altogether, but slowing down a little bit. They're even going to high school recruiting now. You're seeing those offers. But of course, it's all back into play in the spring, especially for some of these players with so many now on the roster, 25 commits to this point, assuming they all sign. If they don't make the team, if they lose battles, if Rich Rodriguez all of a sudden sees them on the practice field and doesn't like them, they don't like hard edge, whatever, we could be back into this again. So, Cody, to kind of start with the most important aspect of the transfer portal movement, because it's the most important aspect of any team, and it's going to be the most important position for Rich Rodriguez if he's going to win right away. And I'm going to continuously point to you, as you said, that you're going to follow mine and others' lead, and off of what Rich Rodriguez said, that he had that intro presser and said, hey, you can win a national title. Bowl game appearances not acceptable. We got to win right now. I'm trying to make it right, and that means winning right now. I'm not waiting around. So the expectations are quite high going into 2025. But they bring in Max Brown, the Charlotte transfer. He was at Florida initially, so he was a top recruit, only played a handful of games at Charlotte last year, made a lot of mistakes, but had some good moments. Jalen Henderson, a dual threat, coming off an injury, Texas A&M player. He also was a top high school recruit. He's a dual threat athlete, to say the least. And then we all know about Nico Markiel. That's the quarterback room right now of note. And, of course, there's Wilkins there as the recent recruit. What do you make of that room? What do you make of Max Brown committing after it was clearly a two-man competition? What do you think the competition actually looks like as we're speaking right now?
Yeah. I would be surprised if it turns into a three-way race, because on the surface, Max Brown isn't a Power 4 quarterback. I mean, his stats at Charlotte were bad. And Charlotte was a terrible team, so, it's obviously not him. But they lost all 5 games he started. He didn't have good stats in any of the games. So, he to me is maybe like the Ryder Burton type. And Ryder Burton didn't have any playing experience, right? But just like come in, be the third guy, so we don't have to throw a underclassman out there in an emergency.
I've seen that comparison.
I also think he might be Nico insurance if Nico loses the battle and transfers in the spring. Here's your backup. Because I think, I'm a big believer in Nico. I believe in the arm talent. I think we've seen him make unbelievable throws.
Yeah.
I don't think you bring in a Jalen Henderson unless you're going to start him, and I don't think he would go somewhere unless he thinks he's going to start. Obviously, I don't know him, but based on his career path, he was kind of on the verge of kind of being the starter at Texas A&M.
He had other offers that he could have. Right. So it's not like it's just WVU or nowhere else.
Yeah. So that's like, plus he profiles as a Rich Rod guy.
Yeah,
Right. So like
100%.
here today, if I was guessing for 5 months down the road or however, like I would guess he's gonna be the starter.
Yeah.
In which case, if Nico transfers, you don't want nobody. So that's why I think Max Brown is Nico insurance.
That's fair. Cody Nespor here again. Mike Asti, WVSN Mountaineer Report. And maybe it's because he had a rough go in 2024, but Max Brown was a top high school recruit. He still has multiple years of eligibility left. Granted, these are upperclassmen. So that's also, we talked about maybe if you're going to do an Eli Holstein thing and bring in a freshman, that would make sense. Maybe pair him with Nico. He loses, he still has years, similar to what they did with Garrett Green and Nico in the past. But you're bringing in all these vets. So you're running out of eligibility. Like Henderson's not going to come aboard, be a backup, and then be done with college football. That's just be ludicrous. So that's similar to almost it. He has multiple years, but it's similar to JT Daniels in that regard. And Max Brown is a little similar situation because the other end of my question was, why do you think he agreed to come aboard for this situation? Obviously, he's not the value of Henderson in terms of the power four. Henderson was just coming off an injury. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't be available even to West Virginia if it wasn't for the injury. Maybe they're benefiting there.
Yeah.
But Max Brown, I get, had a bad year on a bad team. But we talked about this before, is it not better to go ahead and be a starter at a bad group of five than to be a third string or a backup that only plays the FCS game at best at West Virginia, even if you think they're a Big 12 title contender? Yeah. He's running out of eligibility. Wouldn't you want to play and figure there's offers out there? He had offers from group of fives. Why not take one of those and at least walk in and play? Maybe he wants to try this and then try it again in the spring with the spring portal. Who knows?
Yeah. I always say, like, these kids aren't stupid. Like, they understand what's up. Like, Max Brown can look at the roster and be like, oh, they have two other guys. Like, I'm not walking into
right.
Like, he understands that. It's got to be, whatever WVU's coaches told him. Like, they must have been like, hey, we really believe in you. Like, we don't care about what happened.
Charlotte. They watched the film like, this not your fault. That's not your fault. That's not your fault.
Exactly. Like, that team was trash. Like, who cares?
Right.
And they just say, hey, come here. Like, we believe you're a power four quarterback. Come here. We'll coach you up. You can't promise you're going to start, but and maybe like all the group of fives or other power fours he talked to didn't tell him that. Said, hey, come here and try and develop, or group of five said, hey, come here and be in our quarterback battle, and W's just straight up, hey, we believe in you. Like, that's what I would have to guess was said.
He's coming off an injury too, to be fair to him. He had an injury to his throwing hand, so that's part of his injury, which you could argue when you're throwing picks, that's a big deal. Maybe he didn't fully recover from that injury, so maybe he only wants to rehab his image and feels like this coaching staff is right for him. They do have a lot of, we could do a whole show on it. They have a lot of coaches there. Travis Trickett aboard, Rhett Rodriguez there, and to be fair to him, despite not much coaching experience, he was a power four quarterback before. So maybe he does feel this staff could at least help him. And the way this works is maybe he wants to ride it out in spring ball, learn from these coaches, and then make a decision again. It's not like they're locked in for the rest of their eligibility. This is a cyclical thing with the transfer portal, even though the FBS coaches are voting to try to make this a 10-day window throughout the whole year. And I can't imagine that happening. I think if they maybe would try to be reasonable and say there's two 10-day windows, okay. But to get rid of the spring window, I just don't see that happening. I could argue that's even the more fair window to the kids. Because if you lose out a job, they should have that window. Maybe you get rid of the December window and just have that window. That I think that'd be more fair to media, to fans, to coaches. But to scrap that window, I mean, you're screwing it. Like Nico would be screwed if he loses the job. Like I just can't. I just don't see that happening. But we're not going to spend too much time on that recent vote there. Again, Cody Nespor, Mike Asti. I imagine for me that Rich Rodriguez is going to fall in love with Jalen Henderson. That is what I believe is my prediction, because as much as he knows and studies these kids, and I'm sure they're doing their homework as recruiters, I'm sure they've done more homework than even us on these kids. No one knows anything, including Rich Rod and his staff, until they get on that field and see them. And for two of the three quarterbacks in Max Brown and Jalen Henderson, not Nico, they're looking to make sure they are 100% healthy. Hands, legs, body, all the way around because they had injury plague seasons. And again, they're not waiting around. This is not like you can have an injury plagued year and then we'll worry about 2026. They're
Yeah.
looking to go right now, and
Yeah.
they could also lose them in another portal cycle. So I would imagine he's going to fall in love with Jalen Henderson, and he's going to end up being the starter. He is getting NIL money. He was from Texas A&M. He did have other offers, even with the injury, and he did put up solid numbers, unlike Max Brown, when he was healthy, even though it's a year ago. So I'd imagine, again, why I compared it to JT Daniels, I'd imagine that you can't pay a guy hundreds of thousands of dollars in NIL, and I don't know exactly what Jalen Henderson got, but I know he got money, and then try to sell us on a quarterback battle, which is what Neil Brown tried to do when the reporting of the money was already out there. That feels like this situation a little bit. We'll see what happens in spring ball. Do you assess this just off of where we are right now on January 15th that Henderson, for a Mike Tomlin phrase, because we both follow the Steelers, maybe Henderson is in pole position and Nico being the incumbent could maybe Rich Rod's thinking, okay, if you're hard edge enough and you're the incumbent and you beat him out, then it's okay if he leaves because you beat him out and then I trust you. But that's where we are. It's Henderson, Nico Markiel, and then, Max Brown is probably the next Ryder Burton, probably the backup. And if he gets a better situation, which we've seen with Crowder and others after spring ball, then maybe they just wish him well and he gets to be coached for a month and a half. That's kind of how I see it right now.
Yeah.
Obviously, Rich Rod's probably going to try to sell this as an even quarterback battle, maybe even try to tell us it's a three-man race to be nice to these guys. But that's how I think it is in reality right now.
Yeah. I think that's the perfect metaphor of like, hey, the race hasn't started yet, but Henderson is in top position, right at the starting line. Like I think
that's why Tomlin says it. He loves
that's
it. It's
yeah,
a perfect phrase. Yeah,
and I think that's a perfect metaphor because it hasn't started yet. Like nobody's thrown a practice ball yet.
Yeah.
They haven't gotten out of the field yet. So haven't talked to Rich Rod since his intro, so it's not like he's going around saying it's a quarterback battle.
Got some one-on-one show requests here. We'll see when that occurs. I know he's been very, very busy, and we are promised to get one. So yes,
but I mean that's how it from the outside looking in. That's how it appears. Like everybody's joking, but like Henderson does profile as Rich Rod's guy, like mobile.
I mean,
good deep ball, left-handed.
he looks like a more muscular Pat White, Rasheed Marshall. Terrell Pryor, who he obviously really wanted at Michigan, ended up going to Ohio State, and people think that kind of screwed the Michigan tenure. He's that Terrell Pryor might be a perfect comp. Like that's obviously a high ceiling, but that's what he screams. And Nico Marco doesn't scream that. He doesn't scream that to me. We'll see if he could be that. I think that's the issue right now. What do you think occurs if Nico Marco is the starter against Robert Morris week 1, Rich Rod's return to this second tenure? Is it an injury? Is it he somehow plays lights out? I almost find it hard to believe that he would win an even battle, but maybe I'm underselling Nico. And I admit he looked really good in practice last year. He did look good at Arizona. He won some other games, even though we were there in Cincy, and he didn't look good in that game despite them winning. He looked more like a game manager in some of those wins. But what do you think occurs if Nico Markiel wins the job? And do you think that leads to a mass exodus of everybody else in the quarterback room?
I'm high on Nico.
I think you're higher than me on Nico, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, like some of the throw, and you said it, like at Cincinnati last year, he made some dumb decisions and like just didn't play the quarterback position perfectly. But he's made some throws in his time that are like, oh wow, oh damn, like. So I'm a big believer in him. Like I always thought, if Neil was still here and Nico got a whole offseason to be the guy, I always thought he would succeed.
He'd definitely be the starter in year 7 of Neil Brown, 100%.
If Rich Rod's offense, doesn't evolve at all, or isn't, is still like spread and just run option and that kind of stuff. Like I don't think Nico fits that just because he's not fast, right? Like he can run. We've seen that he can scramble.
Maybe that's in my head. I'm figuring. I'm going to the old offense. True.
He's just not a fast, particularly fast runner. But like I think he's competent. Like I assume he's taking a jump this offseason because that's usually quarterbacks do that when they get a little playing time under their belt. And so would I be utterly shocked if he won a straight up quarterback battle? No, because I think he's pretty good. Obviously, he was a 4-star. People wanted him to start, day one, way back
Oh,
when.
yeah. I mean, it would be a controversial call, and I think it's a little annoying that that's going to be clearly the conversation all spring. If he
Yeah.
wins the battle, see, here's the issue if you're Rich Rodriguez, and he obviously probably wouldn't care about this, but this is what we're going to talk about for the next couple months. If Nico Marchio wins a starting job, and I think, Cody, even though this was a Neil Brown thing, and maybe Rich Rod doesn't always do this, I'm guessing we might have a repeat scenario of we end spring with nobody being named the
Yeah.
starter, and we then linger this on, and you kind of you can read some tea leaves and we can report things, but it's not definitive until the end of August, as annoying as that may sound. That is very possible to be the scenario, especially when you have a transfer vet and you have an incumbent. Make the other coach worry about it, even though maybe it'll be obvious to others. But if Nico wins the job, then you're going to have many people say, if it doesn't work out, oh my God, you're paying a veteran who was a 4-star plus, not playing him, and now you're going ahead and losing the backyard brawl. Like, can you imagine if he loses the brawl, you don't have the faster QB on the field, and people know what you're paying the guy because those reports come out. But if Nico loses the starting job, and then you have Jalen Henderson as your starter, and he somehow would lose the brawl, or he would have a rough go this year, then people will be screaming, well, you had the guy on the roster. We didn't like Neil Brown as a coach, but he was a fine recruiter in some respects. He brought Nico in, and then you're bringing in this guy who, if this was 10 years ago, fine, but it's a new offense now, and Nico Marchio fits it better. You should have started Nico. There is now no winning. There is now no winning. He put himself in that corner either way. The only way it's winning is if you win on the field. And obviously people would find reasons to be mad anyway, even if they lose, no matter who's the QB, which would be fair. The pressure's there. He kind of put it on himself, and they definitely need to turn it around, and it can be done, at least with the opening season part of the schedule. But that's where he is right now. And I don't think Max Brown's really part of the race, but it's definitely going to be those two. And I mean, if it's Max Brown, something really went crazy. But that's where he is right now. That's kind of the scenario here. And I think he's going to fall in love with Henderson being faster, being more of a dual threat, being more of a problem for the defense. Last point on this, though, and this would really be something for us in media if this occurred. Do you think there's a possibility that we have a legit quarterback controversy that lingers into the season? And I ask this meaning, obviously, if they're 0-2, maybe they would make a change. Even Brown talked about that, and they eventually did in benching JT, despite him being the vet with money. But what I'm saying is, do you think it's a week-to-week conversation where we are evaluating QBs more than just where they win or lose, and Rich Rod's going to be having Mike Asti be the quarterback question guy, and we're going to be talking about the QB throughout the season? Because to kind of the Neil Brown situation, we had the whole offseason debate, and he eventually benched JT. But at least Nico versus Garrett, that calmed down outside of injury. It was like, okay, Garrett Green's the guy, and then you move on. This feels a little bit like fans aren't going to let their guy go all through the year, unless you're undefeated, which won't happen. So this almost feels like we got a legit QB controversy if they're both on the roster, because the first pick Nico throws, even if they're winning, people are going to say, you're paying X number of dollars to a 4-star and he's not playing.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get packages from him to calm that down, but it just feels odd to have Jalen Henderson there and have him not play a whole year to me.
Well, you just had the perfect caveat. You said if they're both on the roster.
Well, sure.
And I think, like you kind of mentioned it, like these are older guys that don't have years and years of eligibility left.
Yeah.
If Nico loses the starting job, like he could jump in the portal and probably go somewhere and be a starter. Not even probably. He absolutely could. I mean,
I think he's more likely to transfer if he loses the job. Maybe Henderson, because of the injury, would stay, and then you would have this with him.
But still, like, I'm sure he didn't transfer here to sit on the bench.
Sure.
Like, and so that's where I don't know. I think it's the scenario where they are both on the roster to start the year. I think is maybe less likely than either one of them being here and Max Brown being the backup. Okay. Well, the other thing is, like you mentioned, maybe Rich Rod doesn't name a starter like all spring.
That's the thing too. That would make it hard for them to leave then. maybe
I
he
would
wouldn't
say,
do it. But
like to be fair to them, like even if you don't want to announce it, like you got to tell them so that they're not sitting
so
here
that's
all
our
year.
announcement. One of them leaves, and we're like,
Well,
okay, we got it. Like,
I mean, it's I
yeah,
don't know. It would just be kind
it
of
would suck.
shitty to
Yeah,
leave them hanging all spring in the transfer portal. Comes and
especially
goes,
Nico.
and
I
then
mean,
they're
yeah,
like, well, this is my second to last year of eligibility. I guess I'm sitting on the bench all year again. Like that would just suck
yeah,
for both of them to have to go through. Obviously that's the best scenario for WVU because you want
yeah,
as
yeah.
many good players as possible. But I don't know, and it's a weird. That's how what college football is right now. Like the roster right now is not the roster that starts the year.
No, not at all. Keep checking WV Sports now,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
every
good,
5 minutes to really any
uh,
media outlet. To
good
be
plug,
fair,
Mike.
because we all got it covered. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to cover, and maybe even because everyone's feeling bad for Nico because he's been there. Maybe even more so for Jalen Henderson. To be fair, he just basically had an injury-plagued sit out year. He can't
Mhm.
not play for
Yeah,
2 years
yeah,
in a
yep,
row. He
absolutely.
has to get on the field more so than Nico because at least he has film. He has been playing a couple games a year despite not being the quote unquote QB1. Henderson got him. I don't even think packages would sell me if I'm him. He got to
Yeah,
play a
yeah.
handful of games as the guy. So that's just interesting. Clearly, Rich Rod's having some fun. He's going to go as far as he can in these scholarships. He's going to really have a competition happen in the spring. And honestly, when it's year one, it makes sense to do it. It's a little bit annoying, but it makes sense to do it. And none of them can say they're not fully getting coached up because again I saw the joke out there that somebody put on social media that I'm really excited for the Rich Rod strategy of having one coach per player because that's what it feels a little bit like right
Yeah,
now. He's doubling up the staff from Neil Brown and a little bit over budget from what was on the contract. Not saying they don't have it, but they're definitely spending more than just that $5 million. And by the way, Cody, they're basically spending about double what Neil Brown had
mhm,
on the staff alone. So all the projections of NIL, the athletic program, all this more money, it definitely should be the case, is the case, it looks to be the case from what I'm hearing, but it better factually be the case without seeing the bank account.
yeah,
Because if not, they're going to be destitute because they're going well over. So that should be a positive thing. I'm assuming they obviously wouldn't do that if they didn't have the money. Ren Baker's not that stupid by any means, and he's really good with money. Again, here, Mountaineer Report. Find us everywhere you get your podcasts. Also, hit the notification bell if you're watching on YouTube. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti, and obviously check in here at WV Sports Now. What are your overall thoughts on these 25 transfer commits becoming Mountaineers? Wow, it looks like a mixed bag of Jacksonville State players following along, some other players that you're elevating from FCS or Group of Five, which is what Brown and really a lot of major programs do. It's wasn't just a Neil Brown thing. I think it's a misnomer by a lot of fans. It makes sense. A lot of programs do it. A lot of major programs do it, and they did beat out other major programs for some of those kids. They're
mhm,
now adding some Power Four players as well, including beating out some other Power Four programs for those guys. They're getting DBs, they're getting receivers, they got the quarterback room that we talked about, O line, D line, linebackers. However, and it's just opinion, but I even have a story today that we're recording this. The national media is still down,
yeah,
very down. I mean, they had about 8 commits and they were bottom of the Big 12. They now have 25 commits, and this is only 2 weeks later. And they literally are still, according to at least On Three, 15 out of 16, barely in the top 60 nationally. Teams that were worse a year ago that are supposed to have less money in terms of NIL reporting, doing better. A Big 12 team in Texas Tech that's a very similar program historically. You could argue West Virginia being better. They have the top recruiting class in the
mhm,
conference. If they can do it, why not West Virginia? Those comments are being said. And that's just one media outlet. There are others, but 247 isn't much higher. Neither is Rivals. Where are you on the overall class, and why do you think the national media, and I don't mean the local affiliates, those are the national outlets, why they're still very down? Because most of the programs they think are at the bottom have in the single digits of overall commits coming in. They're one of
yeah,
the few that has almost 30. They have 25 plus, and they're not impressed by hardly any of these kids,
yeah.
seems like.
Um, so if my understanding of the recruiting rankings is right, is it I don't know if it's a straight up average, but it's like an aggregate of all the recruits stars
Right.
and points. So
Sure.
um,
Sure. Which are opinions initially, the
yes,
initial
yes.
it's initially
So
opinion.
I think, when you talk about Texas Tech is going out and getting guys to come in and start and you know play meaningful roles. WVU's bringing in guys to fill out the bottom of the roster, really. Like they're just building depth, and that's like you look at
They
these
are.
25 guys, like 4, 5, or 6 of them are like day one, like, yep, he's going to start, and the rest are like, he's going to be the backup, he's going to develop, he's going to be on the two deep, and so
Yeah.
I think the recruiting, the transfer class is watered down in a sense, just because they have so many guys that aren't like top tier, like high profile, high star guys, but they need those guys because they have to they have to field the whole team, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what happens with the first year coach. You got to bring in a ton of transfers because you got to fill out the roster. But
We've had
I do
true.
think the roster is getting to a point. You can pencil in, I don't know, 18 starters right now. Like you can fill out 4 offensive linemen. You can kind of guess all the skill positions. You do an or at quarterback. You can do,
Yeah.
I don't know, 7 or 8 guys on defense who you feel pretty good about. And it's like, here in January, that's a decent spot for your roster to be at in year one, I think. We'll see. Maybe they'll bring in more high end guys in spring to start, or maybe they'll trust who they have. But I think
Yeah.
the roster is at a halfway decent spot just because we can actually like imagine a team on the field, which
Yeah.
2 weeks ago we really couldn't.
Yeah, and they
It's
also lost, I believe, 22, 23 players, and a lot
yeah,
of those players were depth too. But of course, you're losing Traylon Ray, Hudson Clement,
yeah,
Thomas Remack. Like they lost starters, they lost players that actually played as well, more so than the year before. A year
yeah.
ago in the offseason, going into 2024 in Browns last year, it was almost just depth pieces, and all the starters
Hmm.
came back. The
Hmm.
starters left, and that makes sense. That happens when you have a coaching transition. I'm sure they knew that was going to happen. Ren Baker kind of alluded to that. And I do think the goal for this current staff, which even though, Cody, there were reports out, we even knew some of them, and I'm sure they worked the phones and they kind of knew the staff. Rich Rod, even in interviews 3 days in, was mentioning some of these guys. Hey, I'm calling this guy, may call this guy. He kind of knew it a little bit. Certainly his son, I'm sure, was helping him recruit before the
Hmm.
announcement came out. But in terms of officially, the staff was not really put together until the turn of the calendar in terms of the new year. So if you're any of these kids trying to commit,
Yeah.
I'm sure you might fire a text back and be like, I hear you. I'm going to need the announcement, my guy. Like, I need to know what's going on
Hmm.
at your program. And they did let this linger a long time, and they're dripping out the announcement, which I jokingly asked, and they jokingly told me no, that they did not intentionally announce a coach literally every time a commit would announce that they were committing, but it felt like that happened simultaneously
Yeah.
for about 13 straight days, which again, we've now calmed down. But so it appears that because of that, they realized it was going to be a difficult road in December. And I do think the goal was to get the numbers.
Yeah.
And maybe the ranks, they're not, the numbers is not what they're caring about. They yes, they do the averages, but the national outlets are going to say if you have a bunch of 3 stars, for example, that's a 3-star. It doesn't matter whether you have 45 or 6. You just have a bunch of 3-star players. There are some 4 stars in terms of whether they were out of high school or in college that they did bring in, but I think that's the issue with the national rankings. And they just wanted the numbers to fill out the roster because they lost a lot
Yeah.
of players. It's a new system. And Rich Rod got to figure things out. So he brings in players, and I'd imagine he's being honest. Heard from players that left, like Hudson Clement, that he was so honest that it helped him decide to go. That Rich Rod's making it very clear in these meetings. You don't have any job handed to you at all. So you're the only one. I mean, there's only a couple that we figure you can, pen it in
Hmm.
with pen, not pencil. And that's probably Jaheim White and a couple others, but pretty much everyone he brought in is going to have to play their what off and show that they're hard edge, even though players that he had at Jacksonville State and prove they can handle the Big 12. So we'll see how that goes. And you could be sitting here in March, and Rich Rod could be sitting down with these kids again and say, hey, brought you in here. Really appreciate you coming aboard. Evaluated you.
Hmm.
Best to leave.
Yeah.
Could definitely happen. So that definitely could happen. So they are taking a little bit of a gamble, and you have to give the staff credit in this respect, regardless of the rankings. It's a little. He's old school, and if he wins, great. But the recruiting's similar to what it's been, so it's not like it's all of a sudden falling off a cliff. But it's hard to sell complete coming in and you got to win everything and having nothing handed to you. So they're able to do that and get a lot of people to buy in. So if they're doing that and having successfully selling that, then kudos to them. And that is where we are right now. So I think they're happy getting the total numbers. And Indiana's ranks from a year ago, they weren't great either. And they got 30 players on the roster. A lot of them were at JMU the year earlier, which is not a Power 4 program, recently FCS even. And Kurt Zanetti brought a lot of his guys, sprinkled in some others. The ranks weren't great. Yeah, the schedule was a little easier, but so was West Virginia, so at least at the beginning of the year coming up. And then was able to take advantage of it and have an incredible turnaround and go to the playoff. And that's exactly the kind of the high bar of what Rich Rodriguez is planning to try to do in 2025, now back at West Virginia. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti, WV Sports Now, Mountaineer Report here, again on YouTube and available everywhere you get your podcasts. Do you have any thoughts as we wrap up the show on, I joked about it earlier, one coach per player, but it is a lot of freaking coaches, man.
Yeah.
A lot of freaking coaches, a myriad of experience. Most of them have worked with Rich Rod before, or some who haven't at least have connections that they work with somebody else that worked with Rich Rod, which makes sense. You're going to bring in your guys. They did steal Zach Alley from Oklahoma, and they are spending above budget, which, okay. Are they doing too much? Do they need a staff like this? Is this a good sign to you in a way that, okay, if they have the money and can bring in a coach per player, that obviously maybe what was sold to us at the intro presser of all this NIL buzz and all this increased revenue, maybe it's happening. Maybe we're seeing signs that it's actually the case without having those reports officialized. What are your thoughts on this ridiculously large coaching staff?
Yeah.
It's just a lot of guys coaching. It really is.
Yeah.
The number is high. It's not a requirement to have this many coaches on a staff.
Yeah. Well, I get, this is that new rule where you, I guess, can hire as many guys as you want.
You can do it. Yeah. And they are. Yeah.
I think half of this is like, it's good. Like, huge programs with huge budgets are going to do that. And I, unless the coaches don't like each other and are contradicting each other or anything, like I don't think any way that's bad.
Right.
More eyes on something is always good. More guys to do advanced scout, more, everything. The other half of it is there's a part of this where it's like Rich Rod's just kind of getting all his buddies back together. Like,
I was gonna say a little bit of that. Yeah.
Like, what does Travis Trickett bring? Like, if he didn't know Rich Rod, if Rick Trickett hadn't worked with him, if Clint Trickett hadn't gone here, Travis Trickett does not have a good job record. He's gotten fired from really low level programs. He does. His resume is not very good to be complete. It's not. I mean, his coaching resume is not good. The stops he's been at and how they performed, and then it's like, Castile's son is on staff, and it's like, so
Rich Rod's son again.
Yeah,
he
Rich
was
Rod's
a former
son,
Power 4 quarterback, but where's the coaching experience? To be fair, Rich Rod's son, Castile's son. You got multiple sons.
Yeah.
On this staff. Yeah.
So there is a part of this where very clearly he's taking advantage of the rule that you can have however many coaches to give his son a job and give Castile's son a job and bring Travis.
Multiple analysts. Noah Devine is going to get a paycheck.
Yes. So there is a part of it that's that, and part of me is like, that's not what high level winning programs do. They don't just bring their buddies in. But the other part of me is like, if this was the old rule and you had X number of coaches and you're filling them up with people,
sure.
That's one thing. Now it's like, the actual assistant coaches that matter, like secondary or corner and safeties, D-line, like those guys have good resumes.
They do.
Have good resumes, and those are guys that you're like, yes, that makes perfect sense to elevate him to a Power Four position coach, and like that part of it, I'm like, I think it's fine. So like that's I'm half and half. Where like half I'm like, this is good. This is what a winning program does. All these moves look good, and the other half is like, what are you doing? Like what
Yeah.
what are we doing here? We're just having a good old time with our buddies.
Yeah, and to be fair, and people really wouldn't want to hear this, especially initially when Neil Brown came aboard. He was heavily criticized. Even at that time, everyone was really
Yeah,
supportive of him being the hire in
yeah,
2019. People
yeah.
want to be fair. Everyone really loved that hire at the time. But the criticism that slowly dripped once he got hired into those years as being a head coach was that he was just bringing his buddies along. He would let his buddies linger. People thought Jordan Leslie should have been fired a year earlier, but they're buddies, so he lingered on.
Hmm.
And he elevated Chad Scott because he's his buddy. And clearly, Rich Rod doesn't think Chad Scott's an offensive coordinator because he made him a running backs coach, which is what he was originally under Neil Brown. But Neil Brown elevated him because he's his buddy when maybe he wasn't ready for the role. That was the Neil Brown criticism. The recruiting's similar, the wins and losses are not there. And people are always point to maybe he didn't elevate guys. Maybe Rich Rod will. Maybe you bring in a player and he doesn't make you better. Rich Rod maybe will, and his staff. There's more people now. There's more opportunities to do that. But that was the Brown criticism. A lot of his buddies were there. And it feels like that a lot is better. They have more money to play with, clearly. A lot is better. And if McAfee and donors want to donate more to NIL, great. But the criticism against Brown about the buddies is that's the one thing that's still there as
Yeah.
we're speaking in January. The buddies are there. There's even more nepotism. Again, we have to see him on the field. I'm not going to sit here and say that Castillo's son or Rich Rod's son can't coach. Got to
Right.
see him out there and do it. And it's very common in sports, in broadcasting, whoever. Iron Eagle's son is calling games.
Mhm.
I mean, Joe Buck was a son of a Hall of Fame broadcaster before he got the gig. That's just in media. And then, of course, it's a Lane Kiffin is a son of Monty Kiffin, the recently late Monty Kiffin. You know, you get jobs because of your parents. That's not a crazy scenario. It happens whether you're an accountant or whether you're a football coach. You might walk into a law firm and get a better job than somebody because you're related to somebody there. That's just how the world works, even if it's annoying. But when you're doubling it up and you're doing a lot of it, and to say that the one thing that I think is going to be very interesting, because Castillo's son is kind of shadowed a little bit, and Noah Devine's an analyst, and all the analysts, that's not a big deal. Red Rodriguez is the quarterback's coach. That is a high focus job. That does not mean you do a presser every day, because as we know, only the coordinators do those. After the week of games, he's going to probably do 2 a year, but he's going to have to do some. And separate from that, we got a quarterback battle, and the quarterback coach is not experienced. If this does not work out, you are 100% going to need to fire your son. 100%. If you have two quarterbacks that play poorly, or the winner of that job does not play well, and you barely make a bowl game with all this pressure, the very first assistant coach that needs to go will then be his son. 100%. And that is just the fair scenario.
It's just like what happened in Iowa, right? Where their offense was historically terrible.
Yeah. I don't think that'll occur, but with Rich Rod. But yeah, 100%.
I still think they still have to hire an OC. So like,
I was gonna get there, and
maybe that'll be like the piece that's like, okay, that makes sense.
If they spend a lot of money on the OC, and there's a chance they don't have to hire an OC. I mean, Rich Rodriguez is the offensive coordinator. I keep telling that to people. Who's the OC? Rich Rodriguez. He is the offensive coordinator. But if they spend a lot of money on OC, they are then way over the budget. So they got to be getting flooded with money at that point. So that's very interesting to me. I would assume that wasn't the case. And Cody, I will tell you, I was far from the only media member that thought Travis Trickett was going to get that OC job in the OC role, just because the money is already going to Zach Alley. He's somebody you know. You already made your son the QB coach, not the OC. You already made Chad Scott the running backs coach, not the OC. You already have these others as analysts and coaches. Everything else kind of filled out. It looked, when you just connect the dots, okay, Travis Triggett's going to be the OC. If it doesn't work out, they'll fire him. He'll get fired again. And you have a low money OC because you're really the offense coordinator. You're Rich Rodriguez. You're the OC, and you're going to help out your friend, but he's the OC. For him not to get the OC title, it tells me one of two things. Either the offensive coordinator is going to be somebody who has a worse potential resume than Travis Triggett because there's not tons of money left to throw big cash at a major OC. If they do throw tons of money at a big OC, they got a lot more money to play with than even we all know in media. Or the third option is literally Rich Rod's the OC and they're not going to hire one. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's one of those three options. I did think Travis Triggett would get that title.
Yeah.
But this will be it. But did that surprise you at all? That he did not get that title? I mean, obviously you're down on Travis Triggett being on the staff from your other analysis, but once you connected the dots, did you think, okay, he's the offensive coordinator, and what do you think they now do since he's not the offensive coordinator?
1,000%. I thought he was gonna be. I mean, all the pieces seem to line up.
Yeah, that was more of like, did I read that right? Like,
I know. I think it is interesting because, like, you're right. Like, unless they have way more money than we think they have, like, this isn't going to be like, I don't want to throw a name out because I don't want. This isn't going to be some old guy with a great track record,
right?
So that's why I think, and it's going to be a Chad Scott type where it's not going to be a play caller. It's going to be a guy that can motivate and develop and recruit.
And then why doesn't it just be Chad Scott? Then
that's but I did, I think an OC with a quarterback focus would obviously go a long way. With
and that would be different than Chad. Yeah,
a quarterback a coordinator with some sort of option or RPO background. Obviously would do well in I don't know. Because I assume they're not. You can't go out and get a guy like Allie who's young and hot.
I can't imagine
because I don't think
I can't
have
imagine
the money for that. So it's like
that'd be wild. The money they would have, those two alone would be getting more than Neil Brown had for his staff. That'd be wild if that's
so.
The
I
case.
Guess you go out and you poach somebody's assistant, or maybe you elevate a group of 5 guy. But I don't know. But that is, and I think last time we recorded, I think I said the same thing. Where like I think that hire is the piece that's going to tie it all together and make it make sense or not. And it's still. I mean, that's to me like nobody's really talking about it. To me, it's like insane to me that there's not an offensive coordinator yet, and that there's not even really that many rumors.
Yeah, and it's not stopping them from getting commits. It's not stopping them filling up the staff. No one's really reporting on anyone else going to be the OC. Again, myself and others did kind of report that Travis Triggett was going to get that role when it was known he was going to get on the staff, and that clearly is wrong. Now, knowing the way WVU also works, the other thing that is a possibility that was in my head, and I'm not saying this is going to happen because there's not much being discussed or reported on who this OC would be, and there is a chance I think that they don't have one, to be honest, because it is Rich Rod. Like whoever it is, it's Rich Rod. The offense sucks. It's going to be on Rich Rod, and you get rid of the OC, but it's your thing. Is they are very all about, which is why they're doing the every hour drip of the coaching hires to annoy all of us. All about promotion and social media buzz, and it's a modern thing. It's good. That part of the program is one of the best in the country right now, and was under Brown even when the wins weren't there. Maybe there's something in that freaking holster, and they are just going to wow you with that announcement, and they're going to have like maybe, and I don't think this is the case, but maybe like it is Pat White. Like maybe that'll be the OC, and he'll give a favorable hometown deal, and they'll just drip it with videos, and it'll be him. I will add, if that is the case, they better as hell score a hell of a lot of points, because that would then scream a lot of that would be then fully dipping into the history bell. That would then be all your buddies. That would be Noah Devine plus. And again, unlike Noel, Pat White has been working his way up the coaching ranks. I get it. He is a coach. He is not just the former Hall of Fame legend. He is a coach. Okay. He's been working his way up at non-glamorous positions to be a coach. So if any former player would deserve a spot on this staff, more so than Bruce Irvin or even Noah Devine, who I like, who's on the staff, it would be Pat White. And it's been a little weird for a lot of us that Pat White has not. He publicly said he wanted a job, and he's not really been in anyone's report of getting any close to getting a job.
Mm-hmm.
And none of his Instagram videos are him being there, by the way, because that others were doing that. He's clearly in Los Angeles, like he's not even in West Virginia. But that would scream a WVU thing to do, to let everything play out, and then all of a sudden, then they will get national coverage. But I just hope that if that is the case, they are doing it 100% sold on him coordinating the offense, not learning, not another de facto internship where you get money, not as a homecoming, not where the meeting first things that are said are, we're going to get a lot of, I don't want the first word to be, wow, we're going to get a lot of promotion. Let's do this and help him out. It needs to be, he is going to really coordinate this offense. And maybe you don't have to have him be a great coordinator because Rich Rod's going to do it mostly in that scenario. But as much as you're down on Travis Trickett's resume, and his son hasn't really had much coaching besides playing, if you would do that, the coaches below him could argue they are more experienced at actually coaching.
Yeah.
And that is a weird dynamic then, if it doesn't work out. Especially when you have a quarterback battle and potentially a controversy. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's like a 0.1% out there I'm throwing out there just because it's weird they haven't announced the offensive coordinator yet, and I don't know how much money they would have, but he'd be the only guy that maybe would take a little bit less, and he has been coaching, so it's weird he's not been part of this conversation. But that would really make it really solidify good old boys, and I just hope it works out then.
Yeah, that'd sell some tickets, though. That'd sell some season tickets.
It would, but I mean, you best believe, and I wonder how this perception would be, because WVU fans, a lot of coaches deal with criticism from a lot of fan bases. WVU fans really focus in on the coaching staff as much as the head coach and the players. Are they going to criticize Pat White? Will the fans call for his job? If they don't win next year or the year after that, because I'm sure they would give him more than 1 year, and the quarterback position looks like it's regressed because last year Garrett Green regressed. People blame coaching. If quarterback does not work, or Nico looks worse, or Jalen Henderson comes in and you watch all the film from A&M and then he looks worse and he's running similar plays to what you ran 20 years ago, do they fire him? I mean, they can't they got to make sure when they bring in people on that these are not lifetime appointments. You don't want to get into the business of some other teams out there in the region. Like you have to be able to make those decisions. And I'm sure Ren Baker in the program would, but I think a lot would go into that decision if you would do it. Whereas if you brought him in as an analyst, Cody, like Noah Devine, if a year from now, if Noah Devine's not with the program anymore, even if they want him no longer with the program, they don't have to worry about sending a press release that he's fired. He just would quietly leave. Like he's an analyst. It's not a big deal. Even if it's Pat White, you could agree that it's a mutual decision, which they may do and never fire him. It might be a mutual thing. But if it's an analyst, it's no big deal. If it's an offensive coordinator position, that is a gigantic news story, and we would uncover whether it was a firing or not. And if you report it as a mutual parting of ways, but you really fired him, we will out that. So I think we would leave alone an analyst. That's all I'm saying.
And we keep seeing, like, especially recently, like former players getting jobs either in the NFL with their teams or in college. And it's like fans always think they want that. And then, like, you know, the extreme example is Jeff Saturday.
Right.
Like, beloved guy, can't coach, cannot do it, terrible. Like, ruins.
I mean, he wasn't ready for that either. But
no, the Patriots just did it, right?
I mean, Vrabel could coach, but
Well, I'm at the
with Mayo, 100%, 100%,
So it's always that double-edged sword of like, we're so excited, you know, so and so's back, and it's like, oh, so and so sucks, we gotta fire him now,
right?
And I also like. The name, I didn't want to throw out a name. The name I was going to throw out was Mark Whipple, just as an example as an older guy. And you were like, let's talk about Pat White.
Well, Mark Whipple's one that people threw out there a year earlier with Neil Brown, because he's a Neil Brown connection. So I think that's obviously a non-starter.
But he was just going to be my example of like of an older coach that's out there.
Yeah.
But I mean,
and obviously when Pitt brought him in as an older coach, as kind of just a random thing, it worked out, obviously. But yeah, I mean, something like that maybe, but I imagine you got to pay for it. I wonder what that's the one role that is out there, and we are now multiple days in after the staff has been announced, and it was every day, it was every hour that was intentional. So the next shoe to drop was the OC, and then you kind of wrap it up, and it feels like they might be done.
Yeah,
to be honest,
it does. Yeah,
because now they're doing other social media posts that are not about the coach, whereas before they let it just be working on the coaching staff and that be it. They're now throwing videos out there and doing other things that were clearly in the holster. There's not an offensive coordinator, but again, Rich Rod said at his intro presser, he's going to call plays. He is the offensive coordinator in a way. He might just be the OC.
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be weird for somebody not to have the title.
It would be weird, but
yeah, you're right. Like, he's just doing the job anyway. So
maybe that was part. Maybe there was even. Maybe that was part of the issue.
Yeah.
Like maybe he at one point was like, Travis Trickett, okay, I'll make you the OC. And Travis was like, I don't want to get fired from another OC job. Like, you're the effing OC. Like, just throw me on. I don't need, like, maybe it's almost like a negative now because he is so much the OC. So maybe coaches don't want that label, like scarlet letter of OC at WVU right now. Like, I don't know. I mean, the other flip of you would think almost being offensive coordinator in WVU, you almost really want that because even if you lose, you're going to probably score points. Rich Rod's going to be doing most of the work, and you might be able to kind of
remember how much credit Chad Scott would get from the TV broadcast. And every time I had to watch a TV game, I'm like, Chad does not call the plays. But TV would always show him and talk about him. And so maybe that is a positive.
And it wasn't even a secret. Neil Brown would say in his press conference, I'm calling plays. And then Chad, when you would ask him about a play, he would say, well, Neil called it. I don't know. And then, naturally, they would be like, Chad Scott's calling a great play here. It's like he didn't call that play. So we will see, because every play and I think the national media at least knows well enough now that wouldn't be a thing with Rich Rod. They're going to be well aware that Rich Rod's calling these plays. So maybe that's, again, why you don't go down the OC wagon here. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti, that'll do it for this edition here of Mountaineer Report on WV Sports Now. Not to say all the news is over. I'm sure there's more news to come, both with the program and certainly in recruiting, transfer portal-wise. Maybe even some more commitments. They have a few offers out there. They're in a few battles out there. Still could happen. Again, look more to the spring portal. This is still similar path to what Indiana did a year ago, and it worked out for them, even though the ranks don't command that. So, honestly, I love you to consume the content, but I wouldn't be freaking out or reading too much into what's going on right now, honestly. And I know people are. So we'll see what really happens, but you're still a couple months away from really knowing what's going on, and the roster may look different at that point. The QB battle will clearly be a focus. It's interesting. They do have 3 vets right now. And as we are recording this, and news can happen at any moment, no offensive coordinator is interesting because you have a lot of members of the staff that have been announced, and there's not even anybody. Usually the system was a report, a leak, guy then goes on social media and says goodbye to wherever he was. A week later, the program announces it. None of that has even happened. But we would be either doing something different or weeks away if we're going to follow the same path, which is why, again, why I'm throwing out there that 1%er that they got something in their pocket that they are ready and just sitting there laughing when they hear media say things like this. But I just caution them. There's almost part of me that doesn't want that to go down because the pressure's already ridiculous, and I don't know if anyone wants it to be any higher, and it better freaking work out if that's the scenario. Which again, I'm not reporting Pat White by any means, but he's just a name I brought up there. But who knows? Yeah, I mean, it's Rich Rod. No matter who it is, it's basically Rich Rod. So that'll do it for this show. Hit the notification bell. Subscribe, download, find us wherever you get your podcasts, and of course, keep checking in with WV Sports Now. We're fresh every 5 minutes because who knows when news can drop.